There was a sound coming from a room that had been locked in silence for 2 years, and Marcus Hale stood frozen in his own front hallway, unable to make his feet move toward it. It was a Tuesday, just before 3 in the afternoon, and Marcus wasn't supposed to be anywhere near his house. He was 36 years old, the founder of a software company that had made him one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast. And until about 90 minutes ago, he'd been sitting through a board meeting that was dragging into its third hour. He'd walked out halfway through, told his assistant to reschedule the rest, and had his pilot cut the flight time down by pushing hard against a headwind. He didn't fully understand why. He just knew he couldn't sit in that room for one more minute. So there he was, standing in the marble entryway of a house that usually greeted him with nothing but the hum of the air conditioning, and instead he was hearing laughter. A child's laughter, bright and unguarded, the kind that has never once had to consider whether the world might hurt it. His chest tightened in a way he wasn't prepared for. He hadn't heard a sound like that inside these walls in over 2 years. Not since the November night his wife, Elena, had been driving home from her baby shower, and a truck ran a red light 3 blocks from their house. Not since he lost her and the daughter she was carrying, 6 weeks before either of them was due to meet him. He followed the laughter down the hallway, past the nursery door he never opened, past the wall where framed photographs used to hang before he'd asked someone to take them down, because he couldn't walk past them anymore. And there, in the sunroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the grand piano that hadn't been touched since Elena last played it, was a little girl who couldn't have been older than 3. Her curls bounced every time she smacked both palms down on the keys, delighted by whatever noise came out. Folded on the bench beside her was a soft gray cardigan, Elena's, the one Marcus had never been able to make himself give away. The girl had it pressed against her cheek like a favorite blanket. "Sophia, sweetheart, we don't touch that, it's not ours." A woman rushed into the room, apron still tied at her waist, out of breath. She stopped the moment she saw him standing in the doorway, and all the color left her face. "Mr. Hale. I am so sorry, I didn't know you'd be home yet. I was finishing the west hallway, and she got away from me for 1 second. I swear it was 1 second. Marcus didn't answer right away. He was looking at the little girl, who had spun around on the floor and was staring up at him with enormous brown eyes, completely unbothered by who he was. Most of the adults in his life could barely hold his gaze for more than a few seconds. This child just smiled. "Is this your house?" she asked, pointing a chubby finger straight at him. "Sophia, no, we don't point at." The woman moved to scoop her up, panic written across every line of her face. "Mr. Hale, I'll have her out of here right now. I understand if you want to call the agency and—" "Wait!" She froze mid-sentence. Marcus's eyes had drifted down to the piano keys, to a scatter of small handprints pressed into a thin layer of dust that had been sitting untouched for 2 years. 2 years of nobody playing that piano. 2 years of nobody laughing in this house. And in one single afternoon, a stranger's daughter had done something that grief counselors, sympathy cards, and his own mother had never managed to do. She had made the house sound alive again. "How old is she?" he asked quietly. The housekeeper blinked, thrown by the question. "3, sir. She just turned 3 last month. I'm Rosa, by the way, Rosa Delgado." "I don't think we've ever actually. I'm so sorry, this isn't the time." Marcus crouched down, something he genuinely could not remember doing in years, until he was at eye level with the girl. She held the cardigan out toward him with both hands, like she wanted to give it back. "Is this yours? It's soft." His throat closed up. He reached out and took it from her gently, and for 1 full second he let himself press it against his chest the way he used to when Elena wore it around the house on cold mornings. "It was my wife's," he said softly. The room went quiet except for the grandfather clock ticking somewhere down the hall. Rosa's eyes filled, and she blinked hard, not fully understanding what she'd just walked into, but understanding enough to know it mattered. "I am so sorry, Mr. Hale. I'll take her home right now. I should never have brought her to work. My sitter canceled last minute and I had nowhere." "Don't," Marcus said, standing back up, still holding the cardigan. "Don't apologize. And don't take her anywhere." He looked at Rosa properly for what felt like the first time, the tired lines under her eyes, the uniform that hung a size too loose on her frame. The faint tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with fear of losing her job, and everything to do with pure exhaustion. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "7 months, sir, through the staffing agency. 7 months. He realized, with a strange twist low in his stomach, that in 7 months he had never once bothered to learn this woman's last name. He'd walked past her in these halls more times than he could count without truly seeing her. He was seeing her now. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward the window seat. "Both of you. Tell me about her." Rosa hesitated, glancing toward the door like she expected security to appear and remove her at any moment. But little Sophia was already toddling toward the couch, patting the cushion beside her like she was personally inviting the billionaire to sit down. And for reasons Marcus couldn't fully explain, even to himself, he did. That was the exact moment everything started to change. He just had no idea yet how far it would go, or how close it would come to falling apart before it ever had the chance to begin. To understand why a 3-year-old banging on piano keys could crack something open in a man like Marcus Hale, you'd need to understand what he'd buried to survive the last 2 years. Elena had been 7 months along when the accident happened. Marcus got the call at 9:40 that night, and he remembered the exact minute because his watch had stopped working the second he heard the news, like some part of him had simply refused to keep moving forward in time. He lost his wife and his unborn daughter within the same 10 minutes. After the funeral, he did the only thing he knew how to do with grief that size. He buried it under work. 18-hour days. Back-to-back meetings, business trips that kept him anywhere except home. The company grew faster than it ever had. Meanwhile, something in him quietly shut its doors and stopped answering. His mother, Diane, worried about him constantly, though her version of love tended to look more like management. She started introducing him to women from what she called good families, hoping one of them might pull her son back into the land of the living. That was how Camille Ashworth entered the picture. Camille was polished, sharp, and came from exactly the kind of pedigree Diane approved of. She and Marcus had been engaged for 4 months. In photographs, they looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. But if you looked closely, you'd notice Marcus never really smiled in a single one of them. Camille didn't love his grief. She found it inconvenient. She hated that he kept a photo of Elena on his office bookshelf. She hated that he refused to sell the lake house where they'd gotten married. And she especially hated anything that reminded him of the life he'd had before she arrived. Which is exactly why, when she found out a member of the household staff had brought her toddler to work, she smelled an opportunity. "You cannot be serious," Camille said that evening, standing in the doorway of his study with her arms crossed. "A staff member brought a child into this house, into Elena's sunroom, and you're fine with that. That's a liability, Marcus. It's completely unprofessional." "Her sitter canceled," Marcus said, not looking up from the papers on his desk, though his mind was still on the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through empty rooms. "Then she should have called in sick like a responsible adult." Camille moved further into the room. "I really think we should discuss letting her go. There are a dozen agencies that could send someone more suitable." Something in him went tight at that word. "More suitable how?" "Without complications," Camille said carefully. "A toddler underfoot is a security concern, and honestly, it's a little embarrassing, isn't it, dragging her poverty problems into a house like this?" Marcus looked up sharply. "Her name is Rosa." "Her daughter's name is Sophia." Camille blinked, caught off guard by the edge in his voice. "I didn't realize you'd gotten so personally invested in the staff." "I hadn't," he said quietly. "Until today." He didn't tell her about the piano. He didn't mention the cardigan, or the fearless way that little girl had looked up at him, or the strange warmth that had crawled into his chest for the first time in 2 years. Some things he was starting to understand. He wasn't willing to hand over to someone who would only find a way to shrink them. Later that night, long after Camille had left in a temper, Marcus found himself standing outside the small guest cottage near the edge of the property. The one Rosa and Sophia used on the nights her shifts ran late. Through the window he could see Rosa sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, brushing her daughter's hair while the girl's eyes fluttered shut. Rosa was humming, a soft lullaby in Spanish, her voice cracking slightly on the higher notes, not from a lack of skill but from an exhaustion that had settled into her bones. Marcus stood there in the dark for a long time, hands in his pockets, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. He thought about his own mother humming him to sleep decades earlier, a memory he hadn't let himself touch in years. He thought about Alina, weeks from becoming a mother, practicing lullabies in the nursery they'd painted together. He thought about how a woman who owned almost nothing was managing to give her daughter everything that mattered, while he, a man who owned nearly everything, had nothing left to give anyone. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Marcus didn't work past midnight. He sat by his window instead, watching the cottage light until it finally went dark, wondering what it might feel like to walk toward warmth instead of away from it. He had no idea that same warmth was about to put Rosa's entire world at risk. Over the following weeks, something in the house began to shift. Marcus started coming home earlier, not every day, but often enough that his assistant noticed and quietly began rearranging his calendar without being asked. He told himself it was because he wanted to check on household matters personally. He told himself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The real reason had curly hair and kept leaving him small, mysterious gifts. A dandelion tucked under his office door. A crayon drawing of what he was fairly sure was meant to be a dog, though it had 6 legs and an unsettlingly confident grin. Once a single sock, for reasons that neither Marcus nor Sophia herself could ever fully explain. "You don't have to keep these," Rosa told him one afternoon, mortified to find him carefully setting a drawing on his desk between 2 quarterly reports. "I'll talk to her, she knows this isn't her house." "Don't talk to her," Marcus said. "I like them." Rosa studied him for a moment like she was working through a puzzle. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Hale. What did you expect?" "Someone colder," she admitted, then looked embarrassed for saying it out loud. "I'm sorry that was rude." "It was honest," Marcus said, "and you're not wrong, I was colder before." He didn't say before what, he didn't have to. Everyone on staff knew about Alina, even if nobody said her name out loud. Slowly, the way trust gets built one small brick at a time. Marcus and Rosa began to talk, not as employer and employee, but as 2 people who had each learned in very different ways how heavy life could get. Rosa told him about Sophia's father, who had disappeared before she was even born, unable to handle the weight of it. She told him about cleaning houses during the day and waitressing 3 nights a week just to keep a roof over their heads. What she didn't tell him about was the folder hidden at the bottom of her bag, the one she read alone at night after Sophia fell asleep, hands shaking, running the same impossible math over and over, hoping it would somehow come out different. Marcus noticed things anyway. He noticed she was thinner than she'd been 2 months earlier. He noticed the shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. He noticed that sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she pressed a hand flat against her chest and closed her eyes like she was praying. He didn't ask. Not yet. He told himself it wasn't his place. Camille, meanwhile, was noticing something too, and it was making her blood boil. She started showing up unannounced, watching Marcus interact with the housekeeper's daughter with a rising sense of alarm. She watched him kneel down to help build a tower out of wooden blocks. She watched him laugh, a real, full laugh, at something a toddler had said, something she hadn't heard from him once in 4 months of engagement. "This has to stop," she told Diane over coffee one afternoon, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. "He's completely fixated on this arrangement, the housekeeper, the kid, all of it. It's humiliating, Diane. People are starting to talk." To her credit, Diane hesitated. She'd watched her son disappear into grief for 2 years, and something about the way he'd started smiling again gave her pause. But loyalty to Camille and to the idea of the right match for her son won out in the end. "I'll speak to him," Diane said carefully, "but be patient." "Men like Marcus don't respond well to ultimatums." Camille smiled thinly. "I'm not planning to give him one." She had something else in mind entirely. That evening, while Rosa was busy in the main kitchen and Sophia napped in the cottage, Camille let herself inside under the excuse of checking household inventory. She wasn't looking for silverware. She was looking for leverage. And in the bottom drawer of a worn dresser, tucked beneath a stack of folded laundry, she found it, a thick folder of hospital bills, insurance denial letters, and a diagnosis Rosa had been carrying alone for 3 months, terrified that if the wrong person found out, she'd lose the only job keeping her daughter alive. Camille's mouth curved into a slow, calculating smile. "Well," she whispered to the empty room, "isn't this interesting?" She had no idea that what she was holding wasn't a weapon at all. It was about to become the exact thing that changed everything. The next morning, Marcus walked into his study to find a folder sitting squarely in the center of his desk. Camille stood by the window, arms crossed, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. "What is this?" he asked. "Something you need to see," she said, "before you get any more attached to people who clearly haven't been honest with you." Marcus opened it slowly, and as he read, page by page, the color drained out of his face. Congenital heart defect. Surgery required within the next 90 days. Estimated cost $410,000. First insurance claim denied. Second claim denied. A letter from the hospital, dated 2 weeks earlier, warning that further delay could become life-threatening. The patient's name printed clearly at the top of every single page. Sofia Delgado. His hand started to shake. "She's been hiding this," Camille said, her voice smooth, almost gentle, though something colder ran underneath it. "For months, apparently, working herself half to death trying to cover it alone, all while bringing a sick child onto private property without disclosing any of it. If something had happened while she was here, do you understand the liability we'd be looking at? I think it's best we let her go quietly. Give her a severance package." "We're not monsters after all." Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at a surgery date circled in red pen, 90 days. He thought about a laugh echoing through a house that used to feel like a mausoleum. He thought about a six-legged crayon dog still pinned above his desk. He thought about Rosa humming in the dark, exhausted and terrified, carrying this entirely alone because she knew, correctly, that the world would use her daughter's illness against her the moment anyone found out. "You went through her things," he said quietly. Camille blinked, thrown by the question. "I was doing an inventory check and I happened to—" "You went through her private belongings," he repeated, voice low and dangerously even. "To find something you could use to get her fired. I was protecting you," Camille snapped, composure finally cracking. "Marcus, wake up. That woman is not your responsibility. Her medical problems are not your problem. You're about to marry me, remember, not adopt a housekeeper's sick kid." The words hung there like a slap. Marcus closed the folder gently, setting it down with far more care than Camille had shown it in the first place. "Get out," he said. "Excuse me, get out of my house, Camille. You're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 2 years," he said, and for the first time since Alina died, his voice didn't shake with grief. It was steady, certain. "You went into another human being's home, dug through her private life, and used a sick child as leverage to get what you wanted. That's not protecting me. That's exactly the kind of person I never want near my life again." Camille's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally something colder. "You're choosing them, the maid and her kid, over me, over this whole life." "I'm not choosing anything," Marcus said quietly. "I'm just finally seeing clearly who's actually in this with me and who's just been standing next to it." She left 20 minutes later. This time, she didn't come back. Marcus sat alone at his desk for a long while afterward, the folder still open in front of him, thinking about how close he'd come to losing something he hadn't even fully understood yet. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out toward the cottage, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom. He knocked softly. Rosa opened the door, Sofia balanced on her hip, half asleep with her thumb in her mouth. "Mr. Hale. Is everything all right?" Marcus looked at the tired, terrified, impossibly strong woman standing in front of him, and at the little girl who'd cracked his frozen heart wide open without even trying. "I know about Sofia's heart," he said gently, "and I'm not here to fire you." Rosa's face crumpled. 3 months of silent fear finally broke loose, and she started to cry right there in the doorway, still holding her daughter, still trying out of pure habit to apologize. "I'm here," Marcus said, stepping closer, "to help you save her." Rosa didn't sleep at all that night. She sat on the edge of her bed long after Sofia had drifted off, replaying the conversation over and over, terrified to let herself hope. People like Marcus Hale didn't just show up at your door offering to fix your entire life. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. But at 7 the next morning, there was a car outside the cottage. Not one of the staff vehicles, but Marcus's own sedan, with Marcus himself standing beside it in jeans and a plain gray sweater, looking more human than she'd ever seen him look in a suit. "I called Dr. Priya Anand last night," he said before Rosa could even get a word out. "She's the top pediatric cardiac surgeon on the East Coast. She's agreed to see Sophia this morning. I'm covering the surgery, the hospital stay, and whatever follow-up care she needs. All of it." Rosa stood frozen, Sophia's small hand wrapped around two of her fingers. "Mr. Hale, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Marcus said gently. "I'm offering. There's a difference." "Why?" Rosa's voice cracked. "Why would you do this for us? We're not your family. We're barely even friends. I'm your housekeeper." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Sophia, who was watching him with the same fearless brown eyes from that first afternoon in the sunroom. "2 years ago," he said slowly, "I lost my wife and my daughter in the same night. I've spent every day since walking through a house that felt like a museum of everything I lost. Then one afternoon, a little girl touched a piano nobody had played in 2 years, and for the first time since the accident, my house sounded alive again." His voice caught just slightly. "I can't get my daughter back. I've made peace with that as much as anyone can, but I can make sure another little girl gets to grow up. I can make sure you don't have to carry this alone anymore. That's not charity, that's just the right thing to do. And honestly, it's the first thing that's felt right to me in 2 years. Rosa pressed a hand over her mouth, tears sliding freely down her face. Sophia, sensing her mother's emotion the way small children always seem to, reached up and patted her cheek. "Don't cry, Mama," she said softly. "Mr. Marcus has kind eyes." "Kind eyes mean good people's." Marcus laughed, a real, full laugh that surprised even him. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. That afternoon, they drove together to see Dr. Anand, Marcus sitting in the back seat beside Rosa instead of up front with the driver, the way he normally would. Sophia sat between them, swinging her legs and interrogating him about whether billionaires could fly, whether he'd ever met a dinosaur, and whether his house had a slide, which she felt quite firmly that it absolutely should. Dr. Anand confirmed what the earlier paperwork had already said. Sophia needed surgery to repair a hole in her heart, a condition she'd likely been born with, one that had gone undiagnosed until it turned urgent. The procedure was serious, but the success rate was high when caught in time. The window was closing, but they were still just barely inside it. "We can schedule this for 2 weeks from today," Dr. Anand said, reviewing her notes. "I'll want her admitted the day before for full pre-op testing." Rosa gripped Marcus's hand without even realizing she'd done it. He gripped it right back. Word moved quickly through the household, and eventually through the business world, that Marcus Hale had called off his engagement. Reporters speculated wildly, none of them landing anywhere close to the truth. Diane showed up at the mansion herself a few evenings later, not to scold her son, but to sit quietly with him in his study. "I heard what Camille did," she said carefully. "Going through that woman's things?" Marcus nodded, saying nothing. "I should have seen it in her sooner," Diane admitted, and it visibly cost her something to say it out loud. "I just wanted you to be happy again. I didn't care enough about how." "I know, Mom." Something in his expression had softened in a way she hadn't seen in 2 years. "But I think I finally understand what happiness actually looks like. It's not the family that looks right on paper. It's the family that shows up." Diane's eyes filled. "Then let me show up too." Please, 2 weeks later, as the small family gathered outside an operating room, none of them could have guessed how close they were about to come to losing everything. Right at the exact moment they'd finally found it. The morning of the surgery, the hospital corridor was too quiet. Rosa sat with her hands twisted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and when her hands began to shake, he reached over without a word and held one of them still. "She's going to be okay," he said, though his own voice wasn't entirely steady. "You don't know that," Rosa whispered. "No," he admitted. "I don't, but I know Dr. Anand is the best in the country. And I know that little girl has more fight in her than anyone I've ever met. She's the toughest person I know, and she's 3. Rosa let out a broken laugh through her tears. The surgery was supposed to take 4 hours. At the 3-hour mark, a nurse came out with an update. Everything was proceeding on schedule. Sophia's vitals were stable, Dr. Anand was pleased with her progress. Rosa exhaled for what felt like the first time in 3 hours. Then, 20 minutes later, everything changed. A different nurse hurried out, her expression tighter, more urgent. "We need Dr. Anand's team on standby for a possible complication. There's some unexpected bleeding. We're managing it, but we need a little more time than planned." Rosa's whole body went rigid. "What does that mean? She is my baby." "We're doing everything we can," the nurse said gently, before disappearing back through the doors. The next 40 minutes were the longest of Rosa's life. She stood, sat, paced, prayed under her breath in Spanish old childhood prayers she hadn't spoken since her own mother passed. Marcus stayed beside her the entire time, offering no empty reassurances, just steady, unmoving presence, something she could lean on without falling. "If something happens to her," Rosa whispered at one point, more to herself than to him, "I don't know how I keep going." "She's all I have." Marcus turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "She's not all you have," he said quietly. "Not anymore. Whatever happens in there, Rosa, you're not walking through it alone, I promise you that." She searched his face for any sign he didn't mean it. She found none. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the operating room doors opened and Dr. Anand walked out, pulling down her mask. Her face was tired, but there was something else there too, relief. "She's stable," Dr. Anand said, and Rosa's knees nearly gave out. "We had a small bleed we needed to manage, which is why it took longer than expected, but we got it under control quickly, and the repair itself was a complete success. Her heart is functioning exactly the way it should. She's in recovery now, and honestly, she's one of the strongest little patients I've ever worked on." Rosa collapsed into the nearest chair, sobbing with relief, and Marcus knelt in front of her, holding both her hands, his own eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. "She did it," Rosa kept repeating. "She did it. She had a lot of people rooting for her," Marcus said softly, "and a lot more waiting for her at home." 2 hours later, they were allowed into recovery. Sophia lay small and pale against the white sheets, wires and monitors surrounding her tiny body, but her eyes were open. The second she saw her mother, she reached out one hand. "Mama," she whispered, groggy from the anesthesia. "My chest feels funny." Rosa rushed to her side, kissing her forehead carefully around the wires. "You did so good, me Ammer. You were so brave." Sophia's eyes drifted toward Marcus, standing quietly at the foot of the bed, and a small, sleepy smile spread across her face. "Mr. Marcus," she mumbled. "You came. I wasn't going anywhere," he said, his voice thick. "Not this time." Her eyes fluttered shut again as she drifted back to sleep, her small hand still curled around her mother's finger, her heart, quite literally, finally whole. Out in the hallway, Marcus let himself fully break down for the first time in 2 years, not from grief this time, but from something dangerously close to hope. 6 months later, the sunroom piano was never quiet anymore. Sophia had made a full recovery, exactly as Dr. Anand promised. Her cheeks had filled back out, her energy had returned tenfold, and she developed a habit of sprinting through the mansion's long hallways with her arms out like an airplane. Marcus chasing after her, laughing, no longer caring in the slightest about the marble floors or the furniture that used to matter so much to him. Rosa no longer worked through the agency. Marcus had offered her a permanent position managing the household staff directly, with a salary that finally let her breathe, save, and stop doing impossible math late at night. But more than that, over those 6 months, something had grown between them that neither had fully expected, or if they were honest with themselves, had been quietly hoping for. It started with small things, dinner together after Sophia went to bed. Long conversations on the porch about grief, about hope, about how sometimes the family you build looks nothing at all like the one you'd planned. Marcus found himself, for the first time since Alina died, looking forward to coming home instead of dreading the silence waiting for him there. There was no silence anymore. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Marcus stood in the same sunroom where it had all begun, watching Sophia, fully recovered and bursting with energy, hammer away happily at the piano keys while Rosa laughed and tried, unsuccessfully, to teach her the first few notes of a nursery rhyme. He walked over and knelt down beside them, exactly the way he had that very first day. "Sophia," he said gently, "can I ask you something important?" She stopped playing immediately, giving him her full, serious 3-year-old attention. Is it about ice cream? Not quite, he smiled. I wanted to ask if it would be okay with you if I asked your mom to marry me. Sophia gasped so loudly that Rosa nearly dropped the sheet music in her hands. Does that mean you'll be my daddy? His throat tightened. If you'll have me. She didn't hesitate for even a second. She threw her arms around his neck so hard she nearly knocked him over, giggling into his shoulder. Yes, yes, yes. Mama, say yes. Rosa stood frozen, hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring box. Kneeling properly, this time in front of both of them. Rosa, he said, voice trembling with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. You and Sophia walked into my life when I had nothing left inside me but silence. You didn't just bring your daughter into my house that day, you brought both of you into a life I genuinely thought was over. I don't want to just help you anymore. I want to build something with you, both of you, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Rosa dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands, tears falling freely. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Sophia cheered so loudly that half the household staff came running from 3 rooms away, only to find their employer on his knees in the sunroom, crying happy tears while a 3-year-old danced in circles around them, shouting that she was finally getting a real family, one with a mommy and a daddy, and a piano that never had to be quiet again. That evening, after Sophia had finally worn herself out and fallen asleep on the couch between them, Marcus looked around the sunroom, at the piano Alina used to play, at her photograph he'd finally gently placed back on the wall where it belonged, no longer a wound, but a piece of the story that had led him here. He didn't believe grief ever fully disappeared. He'd learned that the hard way. But he'd also learned something he never expected to learn again, that love could return in the strangest, smallest forms, wearing tiny sneakers and carrying dandelions. That sometimes the family you were meant to have isn't the one you planned. Sometimes it's the one that walks straight into your broken house, sits down at a piano nobody's touched in years, and simply refuses to leave. So here's what I keep coming back to, thinking about this one. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have let a stranger's laughter back into a house that quiet? And where are you watching this from tonight? I'd genuinely love to know. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments, hit like, and subscribe if you want more stories like it. I've got a lot more where this came from.